Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami Stackelhaus, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with FibroFog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. You're listening to the Fibromyalgia Podcast with Tami Stackelhaus, episode 41. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhaus. In today's episode, we are going to be taking a deeper dive into post-traumatic growth with Dr. Robin Pfaff. You may remember Robin and I touched on this subject when I interviewed her back in episode 23. Today, we're going to do a little bit deeper dive and share a story of one of her clients that she's been working with in regards to this. I'll kind of put a little perspective on it for you. Before we dive into today's topic, though, I do have this week's listener shout out for you. This is a note that came through on our Instagram feed from Writing to Well. She says, I love your podcast, Tami. You help me on my 30-minute walks on days I'm able. I just put on my headphones and listen to you while I try to get through my light exercise. Thank you. Thank you so much for sending that little note. I love that I get to join you on your walks. That's awesome. I hope you are taking it easy and staying safe right now. All right, let me introduce you to our guest for today's episode. Dr. Robin Pfaff has a doctoral degree in counseling and a master's degree in human development. Before she became a fibromyalgia coach, she worked as a psychotherapist specializing in women's issues, and she did that for over 25 years, so she's got lots of experience. She is a board-certified health and wellness coach and, as I said, a fibromyalgia coach. Since she also has fibromyalgia herself, she really understands the frustration of trying to cope with a chronic illness while trying to keep up with job, family, friends, pets, all the things. And she would love to be able to help you show up for your own precious life. She is really becoming our local expert, local meaning our fibromyalgia coaching community, on things like post-traumatic growth. With her background as a psychotherapist, she brings a whole nother level of understanding to what we go through with fibromyalgia. In today's episode, you'll hear Robin tell the story of one of her clients, Laurie, who has given us permission to share her story. We talk a little bit about what trauma is, the impact that it has on fibromyalgia. We talk a little bit about what PTSD is, post-traumatic stress disorder. We talk about what post-traumatic growth is, and we talk about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Because of the subject matter of this particular episode, I do have to give just a little bit of a trigger warning. We do talk a little bit about suicide and a little bit about trauma in here. So if you are extremely sensitive to that, I will just give you that little bit of a warning. We don't go into a lot of detail, but we do discuss it. I also want to let you guys know that there will be information on the Fibromyalgia Podcast website on this particular episode at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/41. We'll have a lot more information and background on this, on post-traumatic growth, on the adverse childhood experiences, the link with fibromyalgia, as well as information on the suicide hotline, because that is a part of the story here as well. We also talk in this episode about things like using CBD. That is another episode that we have done with Dr. Ginevra Lipton. You'll be able to find the link to that on the Fibromyalgia podcast website as well. That will be episode 18. So fibromyalgiapodcast.com/18. You'll find my interview with Dr. Lipton on using CBD for fibromyalgia. We also talk a lot about various tools, the ACEs assessment, the Dream Week exercise that I do in my first book. Links to all of that information is on the podcast website, fibromyalgiapodcast.com/41. So you'll find all the goodies there. I also just want to mention, because I think it's super fun, this episode is actually coming out on Robin's birthday. So happy birthday, Robin. Total coincidence. I didn't even realize the connection. We had just scheduled her for the next opening that I had for the podcast. Happened to come out on her birthday. So happy birthday, Robin. And thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I also just want to give a second thank you to Laurie, her client, for being willing to share her story. As I say in the interview with Robin, I really believe that our stories have power. So those of you out there, don't be afraid to share your story. You never know how it's going to help somebody else. You know, the whole reason this podcast exists is because I decided to share my story one day. And so I would love to hear from you guys. I would love to hear how this podcast is helping you, is touching you, and love to hear more about your fibromyalgia journey as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let you guys get right into my interview with Robin. Enjoy, and we'll be back here in 2 weeks with our next episode. All right, welcome. Thanks for being here today, Robin. I'm so excited to talk to you some more about post-traumatic growth.
I'm so happy to be here, Tami. Thank you.
Yes. So, as we talked about before I started the recording, the way I usually like to do these podcast episodes is kind of start off with just a little bit of a story to kind of, make the subject come home for people, do a little bit of education, and then a little bit of coaching at the end. And I know you have had some really great success with a particular client of yours in regards to post-traumatic growth. So I would love for you to just share a little bit of Laurie's story to kind of make some context for us as we start to talk about some of these things.
I'm so happy to share Laurie's story and just want to express our gratitude for her being willing to share her story with us and with our listeners. Laurie had a really intriguing way of finding us that I want to tell our listeners about. But I guess before I tell that part, I should go back and give a little background about Laurie's experience with fibromyalgia. She grew up in the Midwest. She was born in 1958, so she's in her early 60s. She was the second of 6 children. And there was a lot of trauma-related experiences for herself and her siblings and cousins, all different types of abuse that they experienced, which set Laurie up for really a lifetime of struggles in some aspects. She's basically a really fun-loving, kind, warm-hearted, open person. But because of what she went through growing up, she describes herself as being a very sad little girl, a sad teenager, a sad adult. And she went down some roads that caused a lot of grief in her life, substance abuse and toxic relationships and a whole lot of things that I imagine some of our listeners can relate to. And she worked in the family business. The family business became really successful. But at one point, disagreements with some of the other family led to Laurie being fired from her job. And I believe she was in her mid to late 30s at this time. And she was just devastated. She felt like she'd had a fabulous career in the family business. And to be out of that and not be working, well, she says that's when her pain started. And I know there are some of us that count extreme workplace distress as a factor in either triggering or provoking our fibromyalgia symptoms. And that's what happened for her. She also started developing disc degenerative disease, which progressed to the point where she needed surgery at one point. And things kind of went downhill from there for her. Post-surgery, she had an extremely difficult recovery and probably started experiencing more and more of the typical fibromyalgia symptoms at that point. And so her diagnosis with fibromyalgia was very hard fought. It was a long, lengthy process of ups and downs and frustrations and difficult and unhelpful experiences with healthcare providers. But eventually in 2014, she was diagnosed by one physician, and then she went on to have that diagnosis confirmed by two other healthcare providers. So by the end of 2015 or so, I guess it was 2017, she knew what she was dealing with, but she didn't know what to do about it. And her symptoms kept getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where she couldn't cook, she couldn't shop, she couldn't take a shower. She lived alone and she couldn't find anyone to help her. So she said she would spend her days in bed, dirty and hungry. And she felt like she had no quality of life, and she started planning her suicide.
Oh, goodness.
And it wasn't that she wanted to die. She didn't. But she didn't see how she could keep going the way she was. And a lot of us with fibro have been at that point, not wanting to die, but something has to change.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is, I've had many conversations with people like that this just isn't the life that I want to be living, and I don't know what else to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so fortunately, Laurie did confide in one of her sisters and in a friend that she was feeling this despondent. And by this time, I think she was in the beginning of 2019. And her sister was very supportive, and the friend was very proactive. He is a sort of a researcher type, and he created a spreadsheet for her and started logging in resources for fibromyalgia treatment that she could try and then record if they were effective or not. And so that generated some hope for her, that her friend put that much energy into helping her find some resources. And indeed, it's always seemed really wrong to me that when we're at our worst with fibromyalgia, that's when we're expected to be the most proactive about seeking out resources.
Right.
Something wrong with that picture. So kudos to her friend for really stepping up and helping her. So one day in April of 2019, Dr. Lipton's book, The Fibro Manual, which many of us are very familiar with, showed up on this spreadsheet. And Laurie ordered the book. And when it came, the very first page, there aren't even any blank pages in that edition of the book. The very first page was a list of testimonials and endorsements of the book. And your endorsement was the last one on that front page. And I'll just see if I can read that real quickly. It says, the Fibro Manual includes all the little things that have made the biggest difference in my own fibromyalgia. This book will be required reading for my students. And then your name, Tami Stackelhaus, founder, International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. Well, Laurie tells me she was too sick to read Dr. Lipton's book, and we can relate to that as well.
Yes, definitely.
But she was intrigued. She thought, coaches for fibromyalgia? What could that be? She found her way to the IFCI website and to the application for a free consultation. And Jaira Halfin at that time was serving as the client care coordinator. And she and Laurie made an appointment to talk together. And after they talked, Jaira recommended that Laurie begin an 8-week fibromyalgia coaching program with me. And Jaira sent me a note and she said, here's more information on Laurie. She needs you badly. And after reading her intake form, I wrote back to Jaira. I said, just read Laurie's intake. It sounds like she's having a really rough time. And she was. And I was a little concerned. I wasn't sure that I would be able to help her. Wasn't sure where she was coming from. We're very careful when people are feeling suicidal, that if they need a mental health referral, we absolutely help them find mental health resources.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm going to pause right there. And I think that it's important to just like clarify this for people. We are coaches. We're there to help you, to support you, to help you connect with providers, know what to try next, get to learn how to manage your illness better. But we're not doctors and we're not counselors, and we're it's sometimes a very careful line. And so I think most people working with us do feel a lot more hope and feel more supported and all of that. But at the same time, there are times when we do need to refer people out to trained professionals.
Absolutely. Yeah. Indeed, as coaches, we're not providing mental health services, and we're happy to provide referrals. And in some cases, it does work for people to be in different types of counseling and also be doing fibromyalgia coaching. They can work hand in hand. And that's where worked out for Laurie. She and I made a lovely connection initially in coaching. And she says that talking to me and Jaira was the first time she had ever talked to anyone who really understood what she was going through and was empathetic. And so I've been working with Laurie, usually 3 times a month for the past year. And it's been a little bit over a year now. And she has made such lovely, wonderful progress in coaching that I just wanted to share that today with our listeners, especially in the context of what we're going to be talking a little more about, which is post-traumatic growth.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think a lot of people listening, I think most people with fibromyalgia recognize that there's a connection between fibromyalgia and trauma. For pretty much all of us, I've never met a fibro person who didn't have some type of a trauma trigger. Now, I think it's important to define terms when we talk about some of this stuff. So in terms of trauma, when I say it, some type of trauma trigger, I'm talking on a pretty wide topic there. Things like anything from being in a car accident, physical trauma, right? Like being in a car accident, falling, really bad illness. Like those things are all traumatic to the body. Also, like mental and emotional trauma, whether that's abuse or having a loved one pass away, or, again, there's all kinds of different physical, emotional, mental trauma. In my case, it was a very long, prolonged amount of stress, which is also traumatic. So, Robin, with your background, I would love for you to define some of these terms for us, just from a little bit more professional, not just a layperson's background.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of people are familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, because we know that diagnosis has been applied to a lot of our veterans who have been in combat situations. And there's some very specific criteria in the diagnostic manual that people have to meet to actually be diagnosed with that disorder. It involves the length of time they've had the symptoms. It involves intrusive flashbacks and a feeling that they're re-experiencing the trauma over and over again. A lot of anxiety, depression, other symptoms go along with that. while not everyone who experiences post-traumatic stress develops post-traumatic disorder, it's still useful to be able to name the stressors that may have been triggers for the development of our own illness. And indeed, the research shows that a very high proportion of people that have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia will meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder at some time in their life. But in addition to that, many of us have gone through what I just call post-traumatic stress. It can be stress with a capital T, which is life-threatening types of stress, or it can, and trauma, or it can be traumas with a small t, which aren't going to kill you, but make it very difficult for you to live your life in a healthy way because you're experiencing so many symptoms.
I think that's where my work background falls under that lowercase t. I mean, it certainly wasn't life threatening, but after 9 years of being in a very stressful work environment, that does take a toll on your mental state, your physical state. I believe that's why I ended up with fibromyalgia for sure.
Right. And other factors that relate to that are, of course, genetics, a genetic propensity. If you have any other underlying conditions, there can be things in your environment like poverty or abuse and so forth that have an impact. In fact, we've talked about this before, but it's a good time to underline it again. There's a concept called ACE, which is adverse childhood experiences. And an assessment has been developed for people to assess the number of adverse experiences they had in childhood growing up. And that score has been highly correlated with the development of chronic illnesses later in life. So it can be a useful exercise for our fibromyalgia folks to get online and take that ACE assessment and see where they stand. I had Laurie do that, and it turned out that her ACE score was quite high, 7 out of 10. And so that is just kind of an objective measure that underlines the understanding that we have that traumatic experiences, whether they're big T or small t, have a big impact on the physiology of our body and can result in chronic illnesses like fibromyalgia. But once we understand the process of what's going on, the good news is that there's hope. It's not that we can exactly reverse all of the things that have happened to us, but we can have an influence on, we can mitigate some of the impact of previous trauma.
And I think too, there's a huge part of having that objective score that kind of tells you, okay, so I'm really not crazy. Like, this life really has been hard. you know? So for those of you who are listening, we will have a link to the assessment Robin was just talking about on the podcast website show notes page. So just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/41 and you will find the link to that assessment in our links and resources section.
So one of the ways that we can mitigate the impact of trauma on our lives and the impact of that on our physical health is to wrap our minds around the concept of post-traumatic growth. Every time I mention that concept, people's eyes light up and they perk up because it sounds so hopeful in contrast to post-traumatic stress disorder. And it is hopeful. And the good news is that it happens naturally, organically, without our having to label it. But the fact that it has a label, I think helps us use it as a tool for what we can work towards, what we can possibly expect as outcomes in our lives.
I think that's great. I know the first time I heard that term was you using it, and I thought, oh my goodness. like I instinctively knew what that meant. Like I've seen situations in my own life. My fibromyalgia journey is a big one. I think it is for a lot of people, where I went through this really stressful experience and I actually came out the other side a better person.
Yes, that's the exact definition of post-traumatic growth that researchers even use, Tammy. And just an interesting tidbit is that research shows right now that 60% of people who go through trauma do end up experiencing post-traumatic growth. And that's really exciting to think about because it happens in all areas of our lives. People come up on the other side of a really difficult experience, feeling like there's new possibilities for their lives. They have more strength in their character. They may be experiencing improved relationships with other people, a greater appreciation for life, and spiritual or existential transformation. And Laurie has experienced all of this. So you can take this post-traumatic growth inventory and just see what places you identify of places where you've grown and developed. And so as I guess I just want to say a little bit more about Laurie's process in coaching, because she's basically covered all of the bases. She started out when we first met and started working together. She was planning a 3-week leisurely RV trip with her friend back to the Midwest, from Florida, where she has a second home. And so we started right away creating a toolkit for how to manage the camping trip, strategies and things that she could do, products she could bring along that would help her. It turned out she was too ill to complete that trip and had to cut it short. But that's where we started. And she was so open. She was so grateful to have found a place where she could get some help. And it was both practical and it was nourishing to her spirit. So
now, were there things that you guys did together, like purposely to help bring out the growth side of this, or was it just something that just sort of naturally happened?
I think coaching in and of itself brings out the growth aspects of people. And so that kind of structure pervades the work that we do as coaches. I think I told you I read back through all of the session notes over the past year that we had done together, and I noticed that there was this really lovely rhythm between focusing on practical things like how are you going to eat? How are you going to get your laundry done? How are you going to get these errands done? How can we get some more effective providers on your healthcare team? We would talk about the practical things, and then in the course of the conversation, something would pop into her mind from the past that she would talk about and sometimes weep over, grieve over losses from the past and humiliations experienced in the healthcare system and frustrations. And then we would decide together on how we're going to move forward with this. What's an action step that you can take? So that was our process for a long time. And then one day we started talking about her. She started talking about her experiences in AA and a 12-step program that she did for many, many years, which was a lifesaver for her earlier in her life, but it had faded from her life. And I said to her, well, do you want to say the serenity prayer together today at the end of our session? And it was easy for me to pull up on my iPad. And so she led and we said it together. She told me later that 2 people make a group.
Right, exactly. And that is how they close out most AA meetings too, isn't it? Yeah. So it was coming back to something that had been very helpful for her in the past.
Exactly. She said it brought it alive for her again after being dormant for so many years. And in addition to it being kind of like a group, the scripture came to my mind where the Lord says, "Where two or three are gathered together, I'm in your presence." And so we worked on physical issues, emotional issues. And then when we started working on her spiritual well being, I think things started to really integrate for her and started to come together. Um, she was able to reclaim her connection to God. And it doesn't have to be, for everyone, it can be a different sort of connection to a higher power or something greater than oneself. But for Laurie, it was a connection to God. And she started rereading Psalms and the Proverbs and seeking wisdom. And when that started to come into the mix, I really noticed a change in depth of our conversations together, because indeed we were accessing wisdom greater than ourselves, a tremendous healing power.
Yes, yes. I found that with a lot of my clients too. We so often, I mean, when clients come to us, they're very much thinking of their physical body, right? Because of fibromyalgia, or they may also be thinking about their mental or emotional state as they're dealing with having a body that might not be doing exactly what they want it to. But we're also spiritual beings. And when we ignore that part of things, we're not really addressing the whole person. So I love that you brought that up as part of her story.
It was really lovely. And so there were lots of turning points, lots of places where she was making progress. She told me at one point, she said, I'm feeling acceptance about what I'm going through. And it's not just a word to me anymore. It's something I really feel in my heart. And so she started feeling better and better. And she was back in Florida in the spring of 2020 with everything that 2020 brought. And one day she told me that she was sitting in the shade of her garage with her dogs, just enjoying the sunset and texting with a friend, when she had this most incredible sensation in her body. She said it felt like an energy greater than herself just tapped her gently in the deepest part of her spirit. And she texted her friend, she said, the universe just shifted. She said the sensation only lasted 3 to 5 seconds, but afterwards, she felt like she'd been to the end of the rainbow, was an expression that she used. And it was a marvelous, marvelous moment of really deep inner healing for her. No, her fibromyalgia did not go away automatically. That would be wonderful if it did, but what she did experience was a greater sense of physical well-being, more energy, and much less fear and anxiety. So it did have those tangible aspects. But she continues to work with me. We continue to work on relationships and managing the pandemic and all of the things that are part of life. But she's working on these things now from a whole different place, and from a sense of gratitude and hopefulness and a much deeper sense of well-being.
Hmm. And you mentioned a minute ago about no, her fibromyalgia didn't go away, but less anxiety and all of that kind of stuff. Fibromyalgia is so tied to our fight or flight that anytime you can calm down your anxiety, calm down your stress response, it's going to have a spillover effect of actually making your fibro symptoms lessen.
Yes, yes. And that's one of the things that we love to do in coaching, is help people calm down their nervous system. And I think Laurie's story illustrates really well how you can come at it from a whole variety of points of view, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. And then they work together so that you get to a different level. And that's one of the things that's really interesting about the concept of post-traumatic growth, is the researchers found that it's not equivalent to resilience. Now, resilience is a wonderful trait to have, but what it basically means is that you go back to a previous level of functioning, like you stretch the rubber band and then it goes back to its original shape. That's resilience. Post-traumatic growth is different. Post-traumatic growth happens to people who they go through the fire on so many levels, and they struggle and they fight for their survival sometimes, and they are changed in the process. They're transformed. They don't go back to where they were. They're on a whole different level. They are bringing a fuller sense of themselves to the world. And, that's one of the unexpected gifts of fibromyalgia. And, we coaches, we're so privileged to walk alongside people as they are going through this process. We're with them when it is really hard and really terrible. I call that the muddy middle, where it seems like it goes on forever before
Yes.
any result.
When you're first starting off, it's like there's some one of my coaches years and years ago used the analogy of like swimming across a pond. When you first start off, you can see that you're making progress because the edge of the pond is there. You can see it receding. But then you get to the middle part and you can't see either side, and you're swimming and it's like, is this ever going to end? And that's the moment that it's really easy to quit, because you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And I think that's one of the, and the whole point of my coach telling me that story was I was feeling that way, right? And with her telling me that story gave me that little, okay, let's keep going, that we get to then give to our clients, which I think is fantastic.
That's right. Laurie told me one of the things that was so important to her is that I encouraged her to show up for her coaching sessions even when she felt terrible. And I always gave her the option. I said, if we get on the phone and you can't handle it, well, we can make it short. But what she found was once she got on the phone and she heard my voice, and again, there we are in relationship, two people in a group or two people where the Holy Spirit is present, then she felt energized, and she could generally make it to the end of the session, and then she had something that she could focus on to help herself feel better. So that taking that attitude of being coachable, being teachable, being willing to try new things, we see it all the time, how it really does make a difference with our clients and their progress, because at the same time, we're right there with them in the middle of that lake, treading water along with them as they go through this process.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think one of the other things about coaching that can really help people focus on the growth of the post-traumatic growth is that we're always looking at, okay, well, what can we learn from this situation? Right? Like, I really feel like there's no failure. There's just, okay, we did what we set out to do, or we learned something, right? And that learning aspect, I think, is a lot of where some of that growth comes from, because especially with fibromyalgia, right? Like we go out, we try to go take a 10-minute walk and we end up in a flare. Okay, well, we learned 10 minutes was too long. Big deal.
Right. Right. Exactly. There's one more story from Laurie's experience that I want to share with you because it's just so fun. And it illustrates the importance of keeping on trying and perseverance. One of Laurie's biggest regrets was that she never was really able to be productive in the workplace after she lost that job in the family business. She tried a couple of different things over the years, but nothing she could sustain. After she had that amazing shift, that healing experience, somehow she found herself online on the website called Poshmark, which I had never heard of, but it turns out it's a really popular online consignment website. and you can create your own unique boutique if you meet certain criteria on this website. And so one day, Laurie got on the phone with me with a coaching session, and she was just so excited. She was saying, "Robin, I am having so much fun. I'm having a blast." She had been a person who loved fashion and loved beautiful clothes. And when she had been healthier, that was to be a fashion statement was something that she was a way for her to express her creativity. And so this has been the most recent development for her, that she feels like she has an outlet now for her creative side, and she can bring in a little bit of money and have fun with it too. And I think that's kind of like her life coming full circle, because she also said, "Robin, I'm happy to share my story." She said, "You can tell them everything. It's time that it was public." And just once again, I want to thank Laurie for allowing us to share her story with our listeners, because I just have a feeling there's somebody out there listening to this podcast today that needed to hear this story, that is feeling discouraged and feeling like there aren't any answers. And Laurie said, just tell your listeners to don't give up before the miracle, which is a really lovely expression that kind of encapsulates everything that we're talking about today.
I totally agree. I think it's kind of going back to a little bit of that swimming in the middle of the pond, right? Like, don't give up. Like, just a little farther, maybe you'll get there. And I think we've all seen that little cartoon where the guy is digging, and he's trying to find the gold or the diamonds, and it's just like a little bit of wall left, and he gives up. But yes, Laurie, thank you so much for being willing to share this. I really believe that our stories have power, and sharing our stories, that was one of the things that was really hard for me when I got my fibromyalgia diagnosis. And I know, as for a lot of you out there, is that there aren't a lot of stories of hope. We get told a lot of, this is your new life now, get used to your new normal, like, all of these kinds of things. But we're not often told stories of people who got better or had a better life. Even if fibromyalgia doesn't necessarily improve, there's still a lot of improvement that can be made, in your life. So yes, Laurie, thank you so much. Now, Robin, I know when you shared Laurie's story with me, there were some key turning points and lessons that were kind of learned. I think that would be a really great way for us to add some coaching to this episode. Like, what are some of the things that that really were turning points for Laurie that might help somebody else? And then we'll also give people a few extra action steps at the end.
Yes, for sure. Laurie became really aware of her pain push anxiety cycle. We talked about that a lot. In fact, we talk about that with all of our clients, because it's such a common issue that when we get a little bit of energy, we just push to get everything done, and then we're crashing again. So gaining awareness of that was really important. She also worked hard to develop a new rhythm of life, where she would balance active days when maybe she had to be out of the house for a doctor appointment or go to the grocery store, with days at home where she was resting. And I think it was a big breakthrough for her. She wrote me one time, or told me one time, she said, "I wonder if my full-time job could just be resting," because that's an expression we often use, that you've shared with us, Tami, to make healing be your full-time job. She said, "I wonder if I could get really, really good at resting." And um, yeah, I know. And so she did. She worked really, really hard, and it went against the grain, because she's a person that likes to be active. It goes against the grain for most of us to have to be on that rhythm of more active and less active, but it actually helps our body so much and gives our body a chance to recover. Another turning point was she expanded her healthcare team. She had had so many bad experiences She said she'd even had an experience with the first doctor who diagnosed her, throwing her paperwork at her, telling her to look up fibromyalgia online, and telling her that she was the very definition of a difficult patient. And then he put it in her file. I know. It kind of takes your breath away. And so, understandably, she was really frightened to see any other providers in her county. But eventually, she did reach outside her county, and thank goodness she found a provider who did have an understanding of how to help her cope with fibromyalgia. He gave her a little glimmer of hope. She also made a lot of progress when a spine and pain specialist referred her for warm water physical therapy. She'd never really explored that as an option. And a lot of us has found that that's just huge in managing our fibromyalgia and being able to exercise a little bit if we're able to do that in warm water. She found a massage therapist who specialized in Thai massage. And that particular technique was exactly what her body needed. So she also started using medical marijuana and also CBD, and that helped her improve her sleep tremendously. So all of these things, these one piece at a time, built on one another, in addition to the things we were focusing on emotionally and spiritually. And so gradually, her body began to calm down because it was getting the things it needed, and she was getting the support from me she needed to heal some of those traumatic wounds. And that's what all led step by step to that kind of pulling it all together gestalt experience of healing, where she felt the universe shift.
Hmm. I think one of the things that really impressed me about Laurie's story was the fact that there were a lot of little things that she did. It reminded me a lot of my story in that sense of, there wasn't any one big dramatic thing that she did and found all this improvement. She just like added the little building blocks and, built it up so that eventually over time she felt better. And I think the thing that's really important about that is that it means you guys can do it too. Like there wasn't anything like super unique that Laurie did or that I did or that Robin did. It was, little pieces along the way. And I think the importance of the coach in that is as having a guide while you're trying to put together all these little pieces.
Yes, and a sounding board and a way to kind of assess the pros and cons. So you tried something, it did or didn't work, and we learned something and we move on. Right. That whole process.
Hmm. I think it's so important. What else you got in there for us?
Um, well, I guess I just want to encourage our listeners to consider fibromyalgia coaching as an option. It really is a unique treatment option. I really love to say, as you also say, Tammy, that it's one part wellness coaching, one part health education, and one part life coaching. We really do look at a person's whole life, and we really do see this kind of progress in many of our clients. And for those of you that are right out in the middle, I just encourage you to keep going, keep keeping on. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Don't give up, but for the miracle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A couple other little next steps we want to give you. One of them is if you really resonate with this idea of trauma and you are curious about your own life, or you just like to have a more objective um, evaluation perhaps. We will have that ACEs assessment on the podcast website. I would encourage you to go take that assessment and just kind of see where you fall. And I think you said Laurie scored 7 out of 10. If you find yourself in that kind of a range, then it could be really, really helpful to get some expert help, whether that's working with a coach, working with a counselor. That definitely indicates that that trauma is still affecting your life in many ways. So that's one thing that we would encourage you to do. Of course, you can always schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches. You can request Robin. Just go to findafibrocoach.com. It'll also be on the Fibromyalgia podcast website, and you can fill out a request to meet with a coach. You can book a consultation with Robin directly. And yeah, what are some other steps? I know you had a little exercise you wanted to do with us, but what are some of the other steps that you would encourage people to do if they find them recognizing themselves in this episode?
Well, you and I have talked about this before. A lot of people have worked on the issues they may have with trauma and grief or loss in a counseling setting, but they may never have talked about them in relationship to their fibromyalgia or chronic illness. And so that's another place where we'd be love for people to reach out to be able to say, no, I just want to talk about what I've experienced in context of my fibro to kind of put it all together. And so you're more than welcome to do that. We would love to hear from you. I just wanted to share a little short exercise on how we can calm our nervous system. And also just to acknowledge that talking about these things might actually be triggering for some of our listeners, because we're talking about the really hard things that people go through, and it could bring up a lot of emotion for you. And if that's the case, or even if it's not, you can just take a few minutes to get grounded where you're seated. Feel your feet on the floor. I'm doing that right now in the chair I'm sitting in, and feel your back on the back of the chair. And as you notice, just that gesture, I took in a deeper breath, because our body, we tend to hold our bodies in tension. And so we have to make a specific focus on relaxing. So you can feel your feet on the floor, feel your back on the back of the chair. Let yourself take in a deep breath. And if you want to stretch, you can stretch your arm. And this is kind of the unique part of this exercise, which I found from a practitioner named Irene Lyon. She says, just pay attention to your hands. That's the third step. Just notice your hands, gently touch your hands, and giving attention to your hands brings you right back into your body and induces a sense of calm. And so that's, I think, just a lovely place to close here, although you probably have more to say.
No, I do think that that's really interesting. I haven't heard that little twist on that type of a centering exercise, but I totally get that. Looking at your hands, I was doing it while you were doing it, and it does, like, it really, like, puts you right back in your body.
Yes, we can put the link on the podcast site too. To this.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So for those of you who are listening, as I said, go take that ACEs assessment, see how you score. We're going to have a few other links to resources talking about the connection between adverse childhood experiences and fibromyalgia, and just a few other things. So just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/41 so you can check out those links and resources. A couple of the things that Robin mentioned with her work with Laurie, things like using CBD, things like, scheduling out her week. We do have a few other episodes and resources if you're interested in looking at more information on that. So we'll also be linking to our episode with Dr. Ginevra Lipton on CBD for fibromyalgia. And then we'll also have links where you can download a free copy of my book. One of the exercises that Robin used with Laurie in varying the pattern of her life, rest days, more active days, as part of an exercise, the Dream Week, which is in my first book. Yeah. So we will have that link where you can grab that book and a few other bonus resources. So you can go through that same exercise for yourself and find the natural rhythm for you that makes the most sense. And of course, as always, if you need any help with this, we would love to chat with you, to have a consultation with one of my coaches. There's no charge for that. And we'd be happy just to talk with you about your particular situation and give you recommendations on what some next steps might be. So, all right, you guys, thank you all so much for being here. Robin, thank you for being here. Laurie, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's such an honor and a privilege to be able to share part of that. And I think such a gift for all of our listeners to be able to hear as well. So extra thank you to you, Laurie. All right. Any last minute thoughts or comments, Robin?
Just to remind your listeners, you can find me at drrobinpfaff.com, and that'll be listed on the website as well. I'm just excited to continue to explore this topic of post-traumatic growth, and to maybe, come back on the podcast sometime and share someone else's story too.
Yes, definitely. I've always said from the beginning, I wanted to share like before and afters, because who doesn't love a good before and after? All right. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here, Robin. And everybody, just remember, you can go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/41, get all those links and resources, and we'll see you here again for our next episode in 2 weeks. Bye, guys. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. If you're ready to see if working with a fibromyalgia coach can help you feel better faster, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com, where you can schedule a complimentary consultation to explore your options. During this call, we'll discuss your fibromyalgia journey, what your needs and challenges are, and give you recommendations on how to reach your goals the quickest way possible. Thank you for tuning in today, and join us next time as we explore more ways to help you take back control of your life and health. My music and sound editing were done by Daniel Munkus at Subtle Soup Records. Podcast management and creative copy by Sonia Louise of Performance Podcasting.